many younger ones here today with us, and many older ones too, I might add, might just have a hard time imagining a world without all the electronic gadgets that we've come to rely on. Imagine no smartphones, no mobile computers, no tablets, no e-readers, no e-books, no audiobooks. Does anyone really read a hard copy book anymore? In fact, we have a little picture here we might display. See this little boy here? You don't see that too much anymore, do you? That's a thing of the past. But did you know the first general purpose or modern computer was created back in 1946? Now, some called it a giant brain. Now, it was huge, immense, physically, but not so brainy back then. Now, let's fast forward to our day. What I have here in my hand, everybody recognizes it's a smartphone. Well, this is, in fact, a supercomputer. Now, why would I say that? Because if we went back to the 1980s, this smartphone here is actually 2 to 3 times more powerful than the supercomputers were back then. No doubt, you would agree with me then. Incredible advances have been made in science and technology, education, medicine, agriculture, and the list could go on and on and on, couldn't it? How does this make people feel about all this that's taking place? Well, some proudly will say, well, we're way past the dark ages. We're not living there anymore. The modern world is enlightened. But there's an old saying that goes, maybe you've heard it, all that glitters is not gold. In other words, something may appear attractive to our eyes on the surface, but what about underneath? What about what we can see beneath the covers, we might say? Well, it's something that's cheap or poorly made or even defective. Perhaps Luke 11:39 comes to mind. There Jesus said to the religious leaders of his day, you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but the inside of you is full of plunder and wickedness. What of the modern world? What can we say about that? Well, despite the apparent shine of the world's great progress, and we can't dispute that, there has been a drastic decline in moral and spiritual values. One expert wrote this. He said, young people are now exposed to a different hedonistic lifestyle where self is central, self-indulgence, self-awareness, self-fulfillment, self-interest, and he really should have included selfies, self-photos, right? Let's turn to our Bibles to 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3, and the Bible accurately predicted this drastic change in morals. Let's note that. 2 Timothy chapter 3, and we'll read together the first 5 verses. It says, but know this, that in the last days critical times, hard to deal with, will be here. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, haughty, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, disloyal, having no natural affection, not open to any agreement, slanderers, without self-control, fierce, without love of goodness, betrayers, headstrong, puffed up with pride, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, having an appearance of godliness, but proving false to its power. So how might we just sum up this prophecy about the last days? Well, the world or human society would become morally corrupted. Not enlightened, but rather darkened. We can see a depiction here. But what do the facts show? This is what the Bible predicted. What do the facts show? Well, sexual immorality is not only accepted, but it's promoted everywhere. Everywhere we look, it's promoted. And conduct once considered degenerate is now commonplace. It's celebrated by many. While homosexuals fight for the right to marry, what do others do? Others seek divorce and the right to be with someone without marriage. The pursuit of riches and having a good time are clearly bestsellers, we might say. Whereas the Bible, where is its place? It sits on the shelf, doesn't it? What about younger ones today? Sadly, cyberbullying, designer drugs, assault rifles, and we might add to it gender reassignment, surgeries, seem to be the new normal happening. It's quite obvious that a dense spiritual darkness has engulfed the modern world, just as it was predicted. But let's turn to a prophecy that said to what extent this darkness would be predicted or would happen. Let's turn to Isaiah chapter 60. Throughout the discourse, we're going to refer back to Isaiah 60. You could mark it there if you want. That's Isaiah chapter 60. And we're going to start just with a little portion of the prophecy. That's Isaiah 60, verse 2, and the A portion. Notice what it says. It says, "For look, darkness will cover the earth, and thick gloom the nations." So how far-reaching would this darkness be? It would cover the earth. Ephesians 2:2 likens it, and we're going to see a little picture here, to the air we breathe. Well, that's not fresh air, is it? That's a picture in New York City. I'm glad I'm upstate now, but yeah, that's not fresh air. That's the type of darkness that's covering the earth. But even so, give it enough time, some may say the modern world should be able to shine, right? It should be able to solve many problems. Is that correct thinking? Well, modern devices certainly have changed our lives. Again, we'll go back to the smartphone. Now this is an appendage of our hand, is it not? It's very useful. You pick whether that's a good thing or not. However, the foretold darkness that we read about seems to be especially concentrated in these types of things, right? In the modern devices of the world, internet, video games, social networks, streaming media, just to name a few. And what do we recognize about these modern outlets? That they are literally brimming with things that will destroy our faith. Immoral influences, the occult, and simply time-wasting pursuits. And incredibly, maybe you've noticed this, incredibly, many will believe just about anything posted on the internet, on some message board. They believe it. But the minute we start to open the Bible, well, what happens? They become suspicious, closed-minded. They don't want to hear it. They think we're trying to deceive them. In progressive lands or prestigious universities, we can include enlightened or bright individuals. Oftentimes, what do these promote? Well, they often promote ideas or concepts that obscure or darken the very fact that there is a loving, caring Creator. Let's turn to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6. Now, we don't stop there with what we just mentioned. The Bible identifies yet another influence that is even more powerful, that affects us even more. That's Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to read verse 12 together. It says, "Because we have a struggle, not against blood and flesh, but against the governments, against the authorities, against the world rulers of this darkness," and notice who's responsible, "against the wicked spirit forces in the heavenly places." What do we learn? Satan and his wicked spirit forces, the demons, are primarily responsible for the darkness that we see on the earth today. But just how bad is this darkness? Let's turn over to Ephesians chapter 4. That's Ephesians chapter 4, and we'll read verses 17 through 19. Now, have you ever walked down a steep, rocky, mountainous path? Let's add to it, it's dark. You can't see anything. How dangerous is that? Very dangerous, isn't it? But let's take a look at what it says here about walking and how dangerous it can be. That's in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. It says, "So this is what I say and bear witness to in the Lord, that you should no longer go on walking just as the nations also walk in the futility of their minds." And notice this, "They are in darkness mentally and alienated from the life that belongs to God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the insensitivity of their hearts. Having gone past all moral sense, they gave themselves over to brazen conduct, to practice every sort of uncleanness with greediness." So we have to ask ourselves, right? Why do so many, after reading what we just did, go on walking as the nations walk? Because the Bible tells us they are in darkness mentally. They are on a very dangerous path. Now, either deliberately or unwittingly, they become part of Satan's objective. And what is that objective? It is to turn everyone away from Jehovah and the truth. To alienate, as the Scripture says, all humans from the life that belongs to God. So I might ask then, is there any relief to come? Will this world's darkness flourish forever? Well, let's examine another prophecy in Zephaniah. It's going to be Zephaniah chapter 1. And we'll read in verse 14, the first portion. Now, God's word guarantees that this world's darkness is going to end. So let's read about that. That's Zephaniah chapter 1 and verse 14. We'll start with that. It says, "The great day of Jehovah is near. It is near and is approaching very quickly." Now, what is this great day of Jehovah? Now, throughout the Scriptures, we might have read that expression before, and it refers to special times when Jehovah executes judgment on his enemies and glorifies his name. And certainly this one is outstanding in that respect, this prophecy. When is this great day coming? Quickly. Very quickly. And how is this going to transpire? Let's read in verse 17. It says, "I will cause distress to mankind, and they will walk like blind men." And why? Because it is against Jehovah they have sinned. Their blood will be poured out just like dust, and their flesh like the dung. Let's ask this question before I continue on. What about those who put their trust in the modern world and its great riches? We can't deny that either. The great riches that we see today. But notice in verse 18, "Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them in the day of Jehovah's fury." And it continues, "For by the fire of his zeal the whole earth will be consumed, because he will make an extermination, indeed a terrible one, of all the inhabitants of the earth." Now that is a day of distress that's coming very quickly, like no other day prior. So you might wonder, why would millions of people eagerly await that day? Let's find out. Let's turn back to Isaiah chapter 60. That's Isaiah chapter 60. And we're going to read the same prophecy, a portion that we just read, 1 through 3. But this same prophecy that spoke about this widespread darkness actually foretells about deliverance. Let's notice. That's Isaiah 60. We'll read verses 1 through 3. It says, "Arise, O woman, shed light, for your light has come. The glory of Jehovah shines on you. For look, darkness will cover the earth, and thick gloom the nations. But on you Jehovah will shine, and on you his glory will be seen. Nations will go to your light, and kings to your shining splendor." Jehovah Jehovah tells the woman that her light has come. It has arrived. Who is the woman that he tells? Well, she is the celestial part of God's organization, made up of faithful spirit creatures in the heavens. And they will carry this out. But what is the light that it's talking about? Let's turn over to Psalm 97. That's Psalm 97. And we want to take note of the effect of this light that is spoken of here in Isaiah 60. And this gives us some indication here. In Psalm 97, verse 11, we'll read that together when I get there. Psalm 97, verse 11. Notice what it says. It says, light has flashed up. We just read about that. Light has flashed up. For who? For the righteous. And rejoicing for those upright in heart. How do the righteous and upright react to this light? What does it say? They rejoice. This light is beneficial, very beneficial. It's a spiritual light that they rejoice about. Now, if you think about a man-made light, you might think of a lighthouse. Now, in days past, they used to use those to guide ships, but their beam of light would be incredibly bright. In fact, it could be spotted. A ship could spot this beam of light from a lighthouse 24 miles out to sea, if you can imagine that. Now, what is the purpose that it serves? It serves as a guide for safe passage. Now, what might happen without that beneficial light in the past? Now, we have a little picture we'd like to show you here on our screen. What is that? Shipwreck. So if they didn't have that beneficial light, this could be the outcome. Now, in years past, too, thieves actually would set up counterfeit light that would cause the same thing, shipwreck. And in a similar way, Satan and his demons also set up counterfeit lights everywhere they can, which is in fact darkness. So how would we avoid this type of shipwreck in a spiritual or moral sense? Let's turn to Matthew chapter 24. Jesus helps us with that. He helps to identify the true source of spiritual light. That's very key for us, to identify the true source, because we don't want to be shipwrecked by Satan and his false light, which really projects from the modern world. That's Matthew 24:45. Notice what he says here. Simple statement. He says, who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics? And notice, to give them their food at the proper time. Jesus was identifying someone here, a group of individuals. Who are these individuals? This is a small group of faithful Christians that would be appointed in our day, a governing body that would provide us with spiritual food, which really is spiritual light that we just read about. Just what we need to guide us safely. Now, some years ago, when Superstorm Sandy devastated New York City, maybe some of you remember that. Maybe you weren't living in New York City. Dawn and I were there. But the people learned something very quickly when that storm hit, that modern electronics do not work well when a storm like that hits. In fact, they all go out. Salt water comes in, no more electronics. I still remember watching with Dawn from our room there in Bethel, storm coming in. Then there was a huge explosion in Manhattan. Guess what happened? All the lights went out everywhere. Now, I don't know if you've ever lived in New York City, but you don't want to be there at night when there's no lights, right? It's not a great place to be. Did people rejoice when those lights came back on a couple days later? For certainly they did. But in a much more significant sense, Jehovah God, through his faithful slave we just read about, his appointed channel, has set up an incredible beam of light in a dark world. It shines right through the darkness. But who's rejoicing about that light? Let's turn to John chapter 3. That's John chapter 3. Let's take note here. Very interesting words of Jesus about who rejoices over this amazing spiritual light that's beaming forth. John chapter 3, and we're going to read verses 19 through 21. John chapter 3:19 says, "Now this is the basis for judgment, that the light has come into the world, but men have loved the darkness rather than the light, for their works were wicked. For whoever practices vile things hates the light, and does not come to the light, so that his works may not be reproved." But notice this, "But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that his works may be made manifest as having been done in harmony with God." So we see a distinction there, don't we? What do we learn? Deliverance depends on how we react to the light. Now, if a person may, as we read, may prefer the darkness, which is in many ways that false light that Satan is flashing. But a person also may prefer the real light, the spiritual light. How does a person make the choice? How does he make a good decision? That is done through the preaching of the good news. Let's go back to the prophecy at Isaiah chapter 60. Let's go back to Isaiah 60. I haven't put a marker in my Bible. I should. Isaiah chapter 60 and verse 22. Notice how Jehovah guarantees that this light would flourish. It would continue to be beamed out to the world, and even in a greater way. Notice what he says here, Isaiah 60:22, the very last part of the prophecy. It says, "The little one will become 1,000, those responding to the light, and the small one a mighty nation. I myself, Jehovah, will speed it up in its own time." What a wonderful prophecy there. How does Jehovah speed up this work? Well, it's by means of a tremendous global preaching activity being carried out by who? By those that have already responded to the light, by his faithful witnesses. Now, we can combine that with Bible-based literature translated into over 900 languages. All of this shows that Jehovah is speeding it up. He's made that light available to penetrate hearts before his great day comes. But let's turn to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. And we want to take note of something interesting here. Now, deliverance, we spoke, you have to respond to the spiritual light. But more than that is necessary than just preferring it. So many people prefer the light. They hear it, they prefer it, they like it. But notice here what it says that we must do also. That's Ephesians 5. We're going to read 8, 10, and 11. It says, "For you were once darkness, but you are now light." They have responded to light in connection with the Lord. And notice, "Go on walking as children of light." And number 10, verse 10, "Keep on making sure of what is acceptable to the Lord, and stop sharing in the unfruitful works that belong to the darkness. Rather, expose them for what they are." So what are we encouraged to do here? We are to avoid the works of the darkness, which are really unfruitful works, and we are to do what is acceptable. And what is acceptable? Well, we must shine forth this spiritual light. And we must, as it mentions here, expose, rather than practicing the darkness, we must expose it for what it really is. And then it also mentions that we must walk in the light. Take, for example, the experience of our 8-year-old little brother, Carlito. Now, he wanted to make his light shine, which we want to do too, but he didn't feel like he could do this without a proper suit. He wanted one just like the other brothers. He didn't have one. So what did he do? He asked his grandmother if she could help him obtain one, to buy one, and she did. Now, shortly afterwards, his school had picture day, so little Carlito, he's going to wear his suit, and he wants to have a picture he can send to his grandmother. So his teacher then says to him, comments, Carlito, you look like a lawyer. So what did little Carlito say? Not a lawyer, I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So we too want to identify ourselves, right? We want to walk in that spiritual light. Be children of the light. Now soon God will put an end to the darkness. He's going to end this wicked old world. Now let's return one last time to that prophecy in Isaiah 60. Isaiah 60. And this picture here now really comes to the forefront. That's Isaiah 60, and we'll read verse 20 together. Notice what it says, Isaiah 60 and verse 20. It says, no more will your sun set, nor your moon wane, for Jehovah will become for you an eternal light, and the days of your mourning will have ended, and all your people will be righteous, for they will possess the land forever. What a wonderful promise that is included in this prophecy. What a wonderful promise awaits us. But as we are waiting,